Hey everyone, welcome back to Future Talk, the show where we dig into the big ideas shaping the world we're all walking into, ready or not. I'm Sara, your host, and today, I have to be honest with you. Today's conversation is one I've been thinking about for weeks. We're talking about AI, automation, jobs, and here's the fun part, why losing your job might actually be the best thing that ever happens to you. With me today is James, a thinker, writer, and someone who has genuinely lived this story firsthand. James, welcome to the show.
Sara, thanks so much. That intro already made me nervous. Best thing that ever happens to you. I mean, losing a job feels terrible in a moment, but yeah, looking back, I'd say that's not entirely wrong. Glad to be here.
We'll get to your story, I promise, and it's a good one. But let's start big picture. You've said publicly that you've never liked having a job, but you've always loved to work. James, that sounds like a riddle. What do you mean?
Yeah, it does sound like a riddle, but it's actually really simple when you break it down. A job is an arrangement. Someone else owns the mission, owns the output, owns the value you create. You're just renting your time and your brain to make their thing happen. Work, on the other hand, is something deeper. It's effort applied to something you actually care about. And for most people in the world, those two things overlap. They're lucky enough to get paid doing something meaningful. For me, they've almost never overlapped, and I spent a long time feeling ashamed of that.
That's such an honest thing to say, and I think a lot of people listening are quietly nodding right now. So let's zoom out. You've described the economic system we live in as something that was essentially engineered to extract value from human labor. That's a strong claim. What do you mean by that?
It is a strong claim, and I want to be careful here. I'm not talking conspiracy, I'm talking structure. Over 2 centuries, industrial capitalism built a system that was incredibly effective at one thing, turning human effort into profit and concentrating that profit at the top. And look, it produced incredible things: medicine, infrastructure, technology. I'm not saying it was all evil, but the operating logic was always extraction, your time, your creativity, your knowledge, in service of someone else's bottom line. And here's the kicker, Sara. It's not failing, it's succeeding. That's the problem. And we're only now beginning to see it clearly.
So when you say we've been played as fools, you mean we've been so focused on keeping our jobs that we haven't asked whether we should want them at all?
Exactly. We've been so busy asking, how do I keep this job, that we never stop to ask, why am I doing this job in the first place? And automation, AI specifically, is ripping that question wide open, whether we're ready for it or not.
Okay, so let's go there. AI. You've worked as a laser technician, a technical writer, a chemical sales rep, and you've said robots and AI can now do all of that. How does it feel to watch that happen? Is it scary?
Honestly, not at all. And I think that surprises people. Look, I aligned optics at micron-level precision. Computer vision does that now, better and faster. I wrote technical documentation. Large language models generate illustrated docs in seconds. I manage client relations in chemical sales. I literally have AI agents closing brand deals for my YouTube channel without a human in the chat. And you know what? I don't miss any of those roles. What I feel is something closer to relief. Like, finally, we can stop pretending that soul-crushing cognitive labor is what makes us human.
That's fascinating. But here's the tension, right? Relief for you, but for millions of people, this is terrifying. Job loss means no income. No income means no food, no rent. How do we square that?
That's the most important question in this whole conversation, Sara, and I take it seriously. So here's the math. And this is not ideology, this is just arithmetic. When a machine replaces a worker, that worker stops earning. When they stop earning, they stop spending. And when enough people stop spending all at once, the companies that built the machines have nobody left to sell to. The whole system seizes up. The people who own the robots know this. Sam Altman knows it. Jensen Huang knows it. These guys, who are not exactly known for their radical leftist politics, have said out loud that some form of universal basic income is probably necessary. That's the alarm bell going off.
And that brings us to your big idea, tax the robots. Break it down for us. What does that actually look like?
So the core idea is simple. If a machine performs the economic function of a human worker at a fraction of the cost, the productivity dividend from that automation goes directly back to the people, not captured entirely by shareholders. That surplus value funds what I'd call a universal basic dividend. And here's the catcher, Sarah. We're not asking for a handout. We built this technology. The AI knows how to write an essay because it was trained on our blogs, our Reddit answers, our open source code, ingested without our consent and without a single dollar paid back. We are the silent investors. It's not a welfare check, it's a royalty check.
A royalty check. I love that framing. And it's not totally unprecedented, right? You mentioned Alaska.
Right, the Alaska Permanent Fund. Every resident gets an annual dividend from oil revenue. It's been running since 1982. Norway has a sovereign wealth fund. Singapore does something similar. These aren't radical experiments. They exist, they work, and they don't destroy economies. The tools are there. The logic is sound. The question is just political will.
Okay, so let's say we solve the money problem. UBI exists, robots are taxed, everyone has a floor. What then? Because you've said solving the economic problem is actually only half the battle.
That's where it gets really interesting and honestly kind of scary in a different way. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, observed something profound. People can endure almost anything if they have a reason to, but they cannot endure comfort if they have no reason at all. A basic income floor solves the problem of material suffering. It does not solve the question of what you do with your freedom. And that question, stripped from the 40-hour week, stripped from the obligation to produce someone else's bottom line, is when most people have genuinely never had the time or the space to seriously ask themselves.
What do I actually value? Not what my resume says, not what my parents wanted, but what do I actually care about?
Exactly. And in Western culture, the first question we ask a stranger is, what do you do for a living? What we're really asking is, what's your position in society? We've been conditioned from childhood to see our value as equivalent to our productivity. When that structure disappears, when the robots make traditional social roles obsolete, millions of people are going to lose the meaning and purpose they built their identity around. They literally won't know what to do with themselves, and I know exactly what that feels like.
Tell us, because this is where your story gets really personal. At 35, by most people's standards, you had it figured out.
Yeah, six-figure income, nice house, wife, 2 young kids. On paper, I was winning. And then, poof, sobriety, bankruptcy, divorce, followed by 3 years of job rejections that ended with a bike shop telling me I wasn't qualified to fix bicycles. By any corporate performance review, I'm a failure. And because of my conditioning, I couldn't help but feel like one. But looking back honestly, I never saw the point of the whole arrangement. And I think that's not a character flaw. I think that was the most honest thing about me.
That is so honest of you to say. And what came after the collapse?
The only thing I've ever done that was entirely mine. I rebuilt my life around 3 values: authenticity, creativity, and curiosity. I took a hard, honest inventory of what I liked doing and what I actually cared about, and I found where those things overlapped in a way that let me work for profit instead of wages. And for me, and I know this sounds almost embarrassingly simple, the answer was bicycles.
Bicycles.
I know, right? It still sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it was inexplicably undeniable. And there's this philosopher, Illich, who wrote a book called Tools for Conviviality. He argued that the best tools extend human capability without replacing human agency. And his prime example, the bicycle, the most energy-efficient machine ever built, and it still requires a human being to operate. A bicycle will never replace you, it can only enhance you. I built my life around that model without even knowing it had a name.
I love that. And you actually draw a historical parallel here. You compare where we are today to the Black Death in the 14th century Europe. That's a bold comparison. Walk us through it.
So, the Black Death killed 30 to 60% of Europe. It was an unimaginable catastrophe. But here's what it also did. It collapsed the feudal labor system. Workers became scarce. Capital became mobile. Wealth started to redistribute. And out of that chaos came the merchant class and then the Renaissance, this explosive redefinition of the human experience through art, governance, science, the foundations of modern civilization. Now, we're not facing a devastating plague, we're facing the sudden arrival of economic abundance. That sounds much better. But the structural disruption is hauntingly similar. A hierarchical system built on human labor is becoming obsolete faster than our institutions can adapt. And within that chaos, there's a genuine opening for something like a rebirth, but only if we're deliberate about what we value most.
Okay, James, let's land this. For someone listening right now, maybe they're worried about their job, maybe they feel stuck, maybe they've never had the space to ask what they actually value. Where do they start?
3 things. First, don't wait. You cannot wait for the Tax the Robots bill to be signed into law. You cannot wait for UBI to kick in. Start reclaiming your agency today. Ask yourself the question right now. If the need to work for survival were removed tomorrow, what would be left? What would I choose? That question, sitting with it honestly, is where everything begins. Second, take an honest inventory. What are your actual strengths, your actual limitations, your actual history? Where do those things intersect with something genuinely good in the world in a way that is specifically, irreducibly yours? That intersection is the only place worth building from. And third, minimize your dependencies. Every expense that requires corporate income is a leash. I moved into my girlfriend's basement one summer and worked at a bike bench, not because I had to, but to create room to maneuver. I discovered I needed much less than I thought, and that discovery, it changed everything.
I want to read something you wrote because it stuck with me. You said your hope, and you were careful to call it hope, not a guarantee, is that your grandchildren are born into a world where work is chosen rather than coerced, where the measure of a good life is your level of authentic satisfaction, where the question isn't what do you do, but what are you working on today?
Yeah, that's it. That's the whole thing. I'm 49 now. I have more agency and more satisfaction than I ever imagined possible, and it came from a complete collapse. I'm not proud of the collapse, but I'm grateful for it, because what came out of it was mine. And I genuinely believe that what automation is forcing on all of us collectively is a version of that same question. The machines are doing the machine work now. For the first time in history, we actually have the chance to do the work of being human. Let's not waste it.
James, this has been genuinely one of my favorite conversations on this show. You've given me a lot to sit with, and I suspect our listeners feel the same. Thank you so much for being here.
Sara, this was a joy. Thanks for asking the real questions. That's rarer than it should be.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Future Talk. If this conversation hit home for you, please share it. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of discussion we need more of right now. You can find links to everything James mentioned in the show notes below. I'm Sara, and we'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves, and hey, maybe go for a bike ride.